And now on Nights with Steve Price from the 50-Up Club, Christopher Zinn.
Yes, we catch up with Christopher every Thursday night, and of course it is budget week and we're about to go into caretaker mode and an election, Christopher. So we've got to start marshalling the troops because there's a lot of lobbying that has to happen between now and the 2nd of July by the plus 55 age group, I think.
Well, look, definitely. And, for people who say that this was a modest budget and there was nothing much to say about it, I think that was really sleight of hand because there's been some really substantial changes to the nature of super, certainly that hit the so-called super rich in the pocket, but actually a lot more people besides. And I think once they realise that, then the head of steam should grow.
Yeah, I mentioned this at the beginning of the program, and there's a number of aspects to these super changes that people are now only just discovering. Luckily for us last night from Jacaranda Financial, Brett Steen alerted us to one aspect that's not yet been talked about, but which we now have to put Treasurer Scott Morrison on the griller for. A lot of people over the age of 55, because that's the age, it's now 56, where you can trigger this, go into what's called a transition to retirement pension. Now, what that is it takes your superannuation amount and you're allowed to each year draw down an amount out of that over the age of 55 as you get ready for retirement. What that has done in the past legally is trigger that pension into a tax-free mode. So you pay no tax on the earnings of your super fund. So your super fund invests in shares. You might make 5, 6, 7 or 8% a year on your money, and you've been able to bank that back into your fund and you don't pay tax on it. Hidden away in the budget on Tuesday night, that is no longer legal. You will now, from the 1st of July 2017, be unable to earn any tax-free money in your superannuation fund. That's a huge change.
It is. And look, that's just one of them. And the point is that you really need a financial advisor to explain these things to you. The Treasurer and others should be far more open and honest about the implications of all of this, as opposed to the suggestion, as I said, that somehow this is something that only affected 4% of people with super accounts, only affected the super rich, so don't you worry about that. I mean, there is the transition to retirement. There's a lifetime cap of $500,000 on post-tax contributions. There's also the concessional amount you can make per annum, which used to be $35,000 for over 50s, which will drop to $25,000 next year. All of these are substantial changes. And I just think, you can argue about the impact and the equity and how fair or unfair it is. But the point is, I just feel it was slipped in, the idea that nobody would notice or nobody would care. There's a lot of people who do need to notice and do care and arc up about it.
The other line they've put in there is that they will now limit the amount of money that you can make as a concessional top-up to your superannuation to $500,000 over your lifetime. Now, that is, okay, you could argue that that's reasonable, but what they're doing is they're backdating that law to 2007. And so if you have, since 2007 until today, made concessional payments of $500,000, if you've made more than that, say you came into an amount of money because a relative died and you've legally ploughed $700,000 or $800,000 into your fund, you will only be able to claim that $500,000. The rest will have to be taken out and will be taxed.
Exactly. And
it's retrospective legislation.
Yeah, well, apparently he's been arguing that it's not retrospective.
Of course it is.
So, I mean, this was I have a financial planner, and that was the number one thing that he identified. I'm not sure that I fall into the category, but he says it's a complete shock. There were people, and again, not the super rich, it might have been for any reason, an inheritance or whatever, that have suddenly found that they're over a cap which didn't exist in the past. And, this is certainly going to really change things. And as I saw someone say today, actually, superannuation is no longer anything to do with wealth accumulation. It's really just retirement income opportunities. So that is a major change to the system. Again, one can argue about the pros and cons of that, but it's not some little tinkling at the outside that just hits the super rich, as they're so fond of saying. It's a complete change of what super has been or is regarded. And people can argue about the merits of that, but I think it's unarguable that we have seen a shift of gigantic proportions, and it's fair enough that people, one, understand it, and two, put their sixpence halfpenny worth as to what they think about it.
And you can't say to the tax office, I don't know, because they're going to say to you, you got to prove it. So does everyone have the financial records that show what they've put into super as a top-up since 2007? That's 15 years ago.
Well, I was speaking to someone who's quite learned in this area today, who said that the ATO don't have the records, the banks don't have the records, super funds may not have the records. Finding out actually is going to be incredibly expensive, difficult, and who the onus is on to actually find out remains to be seen. So I think that's going to be a very interesting question, actually, how you show. I heard someone suggest on the radio that, of course, you should be able to remember this.
How? I mean, I made a mistake
exactly.
there. I made a mistake there saying it's 15 years ago. Clearly, it's 8 years ago. But even so, I mean, how would you remember?
Exactly, or how would you remember how much? And would you be liable to any fault of memory? So again, I think there's a lot more that has to be discussed and explored about this, as opposed to, I'm afraid, it's just delivered on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. Well, you don't have an opportunity to leave it. You take it whether you like it or not, because that's the way the budget works.
And the other point, of course, is that both sides have said repeatedly we won't make any retrospective changes to superannuation. In fact, we will minimise the fiddling we do with superannuation. They've said that over and over again. First opportunity they get in a budget, they do it. And, of course, Labor, they want to take the money. I mean, there's no votes for Labor in people with large superannuation accounts getting angry. They're not going to vote Labor probably. And so Labor will just latch onto this and pass it through the Parliament. And you know, the voices have to come from advocates like yourself and from the 50Up Club and people like myself to actually argue on behalf of our listeners who've done the right thing by the law legally, and they've planned properly for their retirement, and now they're getting dumped on.
Look, I hasten to add, I only have advice of the most general nature, and I'm not a financial advisor or expert, but I think anyone looking at this would see that there has been a major change, and that can have an impact on a number of people. These are not, of course, those at the bottom of the thing, but there's plenty of people, I'd suggest, who are in the middle, as opposed to being the super rich, who will find this really impacting the options or the plans that they might have made. And look, we are encouraged to save, we are encouraged to seek financial advice, we're encouraged to be independent. But suddenly, all those options are really called into question because of what has been a major shift. And I would just recommend anyone listening to, if they can, find out what impact this might have on their plans. And they may well find that the so-called modest budget it was nothing of the sort in this particular area. And yes, we do have to call politicians to account. That might be in terms of votes in an election or however it might be.
Great advice. Good on you, mate. I'll keep talking about it and shouting about it. Talk to you next week.
Yeah, well done. Thank you, Steve.
Christopher Zinn.